Welcome, everybody. I'm in May.
Hey, and I'm Mark.
And I'm Kevin.
And why are we here?
Well, we're here because of the events of the last year and the death of George Floyd and the subsequent protests and the awareness. I personally started to feel like, what can I do as a white guy? And I reached out to my friend Enmay Mangels and I said, Enmay, what can we do? I mean, how can we help bring people together around dialogue?
We shared tears and a welcome heart to say we need to create new space, brave space to cross over one day the peace bridge. So we needed an expert, and we brought our friend Kevin. Kevin comes with a background in research and development and the information we needed about racism today that affects our communities, our world, our schools, our education, and even commerce. Kevin, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Wow, thank you, Enmay and Mark. And it was an absolute pleasure when I got the call and I was in with both feet. I've just looked so forward to having any and all platforms to do this work, and the opportunity to do it with two esteemed colleagues was just absolutely overwhelming for me. Welcome to Detangling Perspectives. I'm your host, Kevin Baker. Are you ready to engage in meaningful healing work, both inside and out? This is an invitation to slow down, to breathe, and look inward. We will explore socialization, history, family, culture, and how they have shaped us, and how we can rewrite those stories with empathy, responsibility, and courage. This is not about blame or perfection. It's about becoming more human together. So wherever you are in your journey, I'm glad you're here. Welcome again to Detangling Perspectives. Let's begin. Drop. So I do a lot of race equity, diversity, and inclusion work. I do strategic planning. I do workshops. I keynote. I am on panels. Professor at Seattle University. Do a lot of stuff, and it's really about having critical conversations about race equity.
And we needed that. We needed
absolutely.
That. So we had the opportunity of having our friends come and join us. We did this maybe 7 times, Mark. How did that come about?
So we just started inviting friends and saying, hey, who would like to have a conversation about race together? And I thought, wow, where do most people going to find a old white guy, a half Japanese, half Chinese, all Valley girl woman, and a Black guy who's an expert at American race history and race relations? And I thought, wow, if I learned something from this, then it'll be worthwhile. And I think we did 7 workshops and we had maybe 30 plus people come through between all 7 of them. And it was tremendously valuable to me personally. And also I was really kind of hungering for like, okay, so what do we do next? And, lots of people are hosting workshops, mostly, government, business and such. But also, like, I realized how unique this interesting little trio that we, drummed up. And some of the conversations that we would have in our planning meetings were really even almost more valuable to me than the workshops themselves, because the things we talked about, I think, really struck me to kind of my core and helped open my eyes and my heart in ways that I wouldn't have been able to do any other way.
I thought I was inclusive. I thought I wasn't a racist. I thought I was open, and I'm not. I have my own biases, whether that's chocolate and pistachio, or whether that's color or culture. I've already had my own share of those kind of problems. I'm being half Chinese and half Japanese, and just recently found out I'm 11% Korean. Spit in a swab, and there you go. But I'm not Japanese enough, and I'm not Chinese enough. So this already caused my own issues and understanding, or maybe more sympathy or empathy for our greater public. And here's our Black friends who are now facing something so egregious. And that starts in the beginning of how education is brought to us in our school systems, in how we live socially, even in our zip codes. It's in each zip code that we feel a different form of racism.
Absolutely. And the thing is that all of us come with different implicit biases and prejudices and all of that, right? A lot of it is based on our experience. And, I often tell people in my introduction that I'm from the capital of Confederacy because I believe that it gives immediate context to my life. It was nothing for me to be, sitting in my favorite diner or somewhere, and someone at the next table is sitting there with the Confederate flag on their shoulder or on their hat or a T-shirt, right? This has been, everyday life for me growing up. And racism is something that's there, and what I think that is real important for everyone to understand is that we live in a racialized society, right? Where there's no part of our lives that is not impacted in one form or another by race. And of course, that comes with different levels of understanding. And maybe understanding isn't quite the visibility. Maybe that's the thing. We all have been out on foggy days, right? And some of us are in more of a fog than others, right? Based on our experience and how that shows up in our lives. Generally, if you're white, then race is the furthest thing from your identity because it's not anything that you generally pay attention to. Mm-hmm. If you're Black in America, right, then it's the first thing that you pay attention to because it's just right there every day. There isn't a day that I wake up that one of my first conscious thoughts isn't, I'm Black in America.
Wow. I mean, and that's the kind of thing that, for me, I thought, okay, well, I was bused to school when I was a kid, and I lived in a, integrated community, and, I participated in all these things, liberal kind of things. But what I didn't realize is just how ingrained systemic racism is, not only in our society, but even in my own life. And it wasn't until I started, as we were doing these workshops and going through these processes and such, that I began to ask myself, and I realized, yeah, I mean, as Kevin says, as a white person, it's like you don't think about race until you see a Black person. And then it's like, okay, what is my relationship with Black people or people of color, and having conversations with other friends, white friends, I hear all the stuff that Kevin and other people would tell me. Oh yeah, well, I'm not racist because my sister-in-law is married to a Black person. Or I'm not racist because I went to an integrated college, high school, played on an integrated sports team, whatever. And then, or I'm not racist, I have there's a person of color in my team, and she's really contributing. She's really carrying her weight, and like, stuff like that. And it's like, wow, it's just, you don't know until it's sort of like the whole microaggressions thing, which we'll definitely talk about at some point. But this whole idea of all this stuff is swimming around, and it's sort of like, well, because I'm a Buddhist, sometimes I look from the Buddhist tradition, but when the Buddha, looks at the world versus the average person, how do they see the world? Well, a person in the world of hell sees it on fire. And a person in the world of tranquility thinks everything's groovy, and a person in the world of enlightenment sees everything as enlightenment. But the truth is that all those things are actually happening, depending on where you're at and who you are in America, based primarily on race or caste, let alone class.
This last year has been about this trifecta, the global pandemic, racial distress, and even our political conditions, which help to fire the fuels that we need for change. Marc, how do you feel about the words white privilege?
Well, I mean, until we started having these discussions, I really didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what was white privilege. But as a white male in America, I realized, wow, so much stuff I like got just for being a white male. You know, like even when we talk about like, okay, I'm driving down the street and the lights start, and I'm driving on the street and a cop pulls up behind me and the lights go off. What do you think about when you see the lights behind you?
Immediate fear jumps into my mind.
Yeah.
Immediate fear.
What do you think about, M.A.? What goes through your head when the lights go off behind you? Cop pulls up.
Oh, maybe I was singing too loud.
Yeah. And what do I think about? Damn, did I make a bad left turn? I mean, I don't think I'm going to get shot. I don't think there's any likelihood. I'm more aware of the possibility of police violence, but as a white male, the person who is going to come up to my window is 99% likely to be another white male. And they're going to be deferential to me because I'm an older white guy and I drive a nice car. And that's white privilege, baby. I get the default benefit of being a white male in America. And so when we talk about these conversations, I understand why other white people are super uncomfortable about all this. So I kind of refer to myself as a recovering racist because I'm more, pulling the delusions, the veils of delusion away from my eyes about the truth of what it's like to live in America, depending on who you are, what color you are, and what gender you are.
Kevin, how do you want to recommend that we can become more like cultural insiders versus cultural outsiders? What would you like to see happen next?
In my work a lot, I talk about white normative behaviors. A few is perfectionism, sense of urgency, quantity over quality, quantity over quality, the right to comfort. What are some others? I can't think of all of them right now off the top of my head.
Perfectionism.
It's
solution-oriented.
What was that, Mark?
Solution-oriented.
Solution-oriented. All of these things that come so much up in all of our environments and in our society, right? And what's actually happened is white normative behaviors has become this bedrock and it's been lifted up above everything else, and everyone else's cultural norms are lower. And this society, actually, the unspoken rule is that if you want to be successful, you have to act white. Right? We all have been swimming in the waters of white normal behavior for so long that sometimes we don't even know that we're showing up in those ways, right? And that's white people, that's Black people, that's Asian people, that's Latin people. I mean, it's everyone in our society, right? We've just been swimming. And I will often ask the question, does a fish know that it's wet? Right? And of course it doesn't. So the object or the task becomes to understand how we're showing up in the world. What are those normative behaviors? How do we become aware of those? And then understand that other people show up in other ways and make space for everyone to show up as their true cultural selves. Right. And so it's something else that I say a lot is the object is not for Black people or people of color or indigenous peoples to show up as better white people. That should not be our object, but that's often what happens. And the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, oftentimes you have organizations, they think about that diversity part, which is having people that look different in your organization, right? They think about the equity part, right? How do we begin to treat people, right? And they think about the inclusion part, which, is people having voice in the space. All of them don't come together oftentimes in a package, right, in organizations. And the object ultimately also is for people to be able to show up in those organizations as their true cultural self and stop code switching. Now, you are familiar with code switching?
Talk about that.
So W.B. Du Bois talked about double consciousness. That said, if you're Black in America, you have to have this dual consciousness where you're aware of how you are and how you show up when you're around white people, and then how you are and how you show up when you're around people of your own race, right? It's different. And oftentimes, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color show up in work environments and they have to switch off their cultural selves and switch on their white selves and organizations so that they can show up in ways that doesn't scare white people, that doesn't put fear in white people, right? And that's what ultimately we have to change, right? No one should have to code switch. Right? We all should be able to show up as our true authentic selves, meaning that if Kevin shows up in an environment and Kevin may be a little louder because I'm excited about a topic that we may be talking about, is not for people to be afraid, because now all of a sudden Kevin has gotten loud.
And this is a real problem in schools where, teachers are dealing with large classes of diverse cultures and they want classroom control, and they feel that some of these behaviors that may be cultural norms in other worlds are disruptive and counter to what they're trying to accomplish. And bam, you start that school to prison pipeline like early on.
Absolutely. Right. Because when we think about biases and stereotypes, right, and implicit biases, we have a tendency to pull towards those that are most like us. So knowing in schools and I'm throwing these numbers out, they may not be as accurate, right? So, but at least 75% of the teachers in this country are white women. So that brings up normative behaviors that in the classroom that they look for. Sit in your seat, be quiet, raise your hand if you want to say something, if you want to contribute, don't talk to your neighbor. When you take a test, it's just you, here's another white norm, right? Rugged individualism, right? So you do everything on your own, which a lot of societies, when we think about Asians, when we think about Africans and African Americans and Latinx and other indigenous peoples, we're group relational oriented and not around this individual thing, right? So all of these things sets up the school to prison pipeline. Right. So
how do we
if a white
begin the process of breaking these institutionalized effects, whether they're in our schools or even in our homes, in our families? I would say that it starts with communication, and it starts with bringing up these very difficult conversations.
Absolutely. It does begin with conversations. When we think about building relationships and building affinity for one another, it's about communication. But what are we communicating, right? It's really having open, honest dialogue about our reality.
But see, that's one of the things that I'm encouraged about that's happened in this last year, even in the midst of COVID, and, is that a lot of white people are realizing they have almost no interaction with people of color. Now, the only interaction they might have is at work, and there's a power dynamic at work. It really depends. So if there's somebody on the same level as you, you might be able to have a conversation with them. But I'm not able to, at work, I'm not going to ask somebody, hey, what does it feel like to be a Black man in America? Like, that's not a question that's going to be socially acceptable at work.
Well, but why isn't it? Well, see, okay, so here's the thing, right? So now let's go back to another white normative behavior, right? Dichotomous thinking, this or that, the separation. So, and, white folks separate and say we have our work environment and we have our personal lives. But one of the things that I found is that everywhere I go, there I am with my beliefs, my thoughts, my behaviors. All of that shows up regardless of what environment I'm in, right? So how do we begin to understand that there really is no separation between a work environment, home environment, and then your own thoughts, right? When we talk about institutional and systemic racism, the only way we're going to change that is for people to be willing to do their personal work.
But you talked about code switching, and I think there's another version of that I don't know what I would call it, but most people are different at work than they are with their friends, and they're different with their family than they are with their at work. And so I mean there's a power dynamic at work. There's the boss, and there's a lot going on there, and I don't feel necessarily that I don't feel free to express every opinion that shows up in my head. And by the way, it's probably a good thing, because a lot of the opinions I have would not be very positive or constructive. Even as a Buddhist, I have to check myself and go, now, do I really want to say that? But I mean, I understand it would be a wonderful thing for all of us to be able to be our authentic, true selves 100% of the time in all situations. But I don't.
But when you show up in your work environment, Mark, you're already there as the coup de grace, the white male, right? So yes, you may not be able to share all of your thoughts, but you're not checking any part of yourself at the door.
No, I'm not. I mean, I am not concerned. I'm not as concerned about how I say something that I say. Well, I think everybody at work is conscious, self-conscious about what you say or do in certain situations, especially after the Me Too movement and all that stuff. I mean, the kinds of things that happened when I was new in television, when I was a young man in television, or when I was new in the game business, would be considered 100% unacceptable today. So I mean, many of those things have shifted significantly, and many of them have shifted significantly in the last handful of years. So there's been a tremendous amount of change. But no, I'm not saying, I don't talk about Buddhism at work. I mean, unless someone's in some kind of crisis mode or something, I don't say, well, the Buddha said, or, I don't do that. So I'm not bringing my 100% authentic self present.
How much do you believe? What percentage would you put it at?
Oh, I mean, 80, 85, 90%, I would say.
Okay.
I would say.
And I'm in a corporate or work environment like that. I may show up at 40%.
Wow, that's a big delta. That's a big.
Well, right. Listen to this. That's an awareness that we should all be sensitive to, or even more compassionate to.
I mean, my concern is that I don't say some stupid shit that gets me in trouble.
And I have to be aware of, and I think this is true for a lot of Black people, right, is we have to, when we're there, we have to worry about our tone in which we say something. Are we too loud? Are we too boisterous? Just how are we showing up, right? And then when we talk about perfectionism, when we talk about worshiping the written word, quantity over quality, all of these other behaviors that we have to take on that aren't necessarily natural to us. And that's not to say that some of us don't have some of those things built into our personality, because, you know, we do. And because of this society and how we are, some of those get so fine-tuned and they become so much a part of us that we then don't recognize how it shows up in us, right? So those things begin to grow and everything else diminish. And I would dare to say that a majority of Black people, when they go to work, that they feel like that they have to diminish themselves and who they are to be accepted in that environment.
Mm.
And that's the part, right? That's the heartache. That's the heartache, is that I feel diminished,
Mm-hmm.
right? In that environment, so that I can survive in that environment, because we all have bills,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? We all want to have nice lifestyles. We all want nice things, right? So what do I have to give up of myself in order to keep that paycheck coming?
Mm-hmm.
Would you call that stereotyping or racism?
It's racism. You know, and don't get me wrong, this also happens on gender channels, you know, and other social channels as well, right? So, you know, although racism is one of the oldest, well, it's really racism in America was, you know, before America really was America. You know, because the Spaniards, I believe, landed in Florida 500 years ago. You know, the 400 year, or at this point 402 year date, the 1619 that we date is British enslavement in the country. You know, so you know, it's much older. I think America was quote unquote born in 1776.
Yeah.
You know, so almost a full 200 years before this country that we know of as America, racism was here and existed. But that doesn't mean that sexism wasn't here either, right? Because of course, to be a citizen, you had to be a white male landowner, right? White women couldn't own property. There's an interesting book out called They Were Her Property as well, which does go into white women's role in enslavement and owning slaves and all of that as well, right? So it's I think that there's a full spectrum, and this whole thing is complicated. You know, when we talk about how do we undo it all, the first thing that we have to recognize is that it's complicated.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, as a Buddhist, it's karma. You know, this country was born of blood and bondage. And so we all share this karma. In other words, this accretion of all these causes, you know, these words, thoughts, and deeds that were there before the country was born, but among the people who created the country, and then what we've done with it. You know, and one of the reasons I got so interested in these conversations is that, you know, this country is accomplished so many amazing things being so screwed up. And it just like, what could our country be like if everybody had the ability to bring their best self forth? If everyone was free to contribute and to, you know, to chase their vision and their passion? I mean, the country would be incredible. We'd be unstoppable as a nation. But yet here we are. It sort of reminds me about when I worked at the world's largest tech company. And I was just shocked at how dysfunctional the company, I was like, how could this company be so successful and so dysfunctional at the same time? And in a sense, that's how I see our nation. Our nation is successful, and just everywhere you look, it's dysfunctional, you know, and yet.
When you think about the code of the country, about the moral code of the country, it was written by 4 white guys whose faces are slammed into the side of a mountain. Do those policies work anymore? Hell no. So
where's the evolution? And a question that I would ask is, where has America been successful? How has America been successful?
capitalism, imperialism,
colonialism. So when you say capitalism and imperialism, I see colonialism. America is the new colonial power.
Yeah, but
Oh,
I mean, I look at it and I see internal colonialism. In other words, I see peoples and neighborhoods, communities that are like colonies to the larger dominant society for sure. You know, when you look at the captains of industry, they're all white men, you know? And then, you know, when we look at successful Black people today, where are they coming from? You know, what parts of society are allowing Black people to be successful today?
Not many, that's for sure. You know, and there's, I mean, you know, again, these successes, you know, I attribute them again to white normative behaviors, right? And what we call success. So when I think about capitalism, and believe me, I mean, I like making money just as much as the next person, you know, but how am I also thinking about my brothers and my sisters and my other citizens in this country and how they are cared for, right? So rugged individualism says that we're all on our own, right? And we, you know, we do what we do on our own. And, you know, does that really provide for a successful society? You know, in order for capitalism to work, then that means we have to have underclass, right? We have to have the haves and the have-nots, right? And I'm just questioning and wondering, you know, about that and what's the impact of that on us. We have homelessness everywhere, right? We have all of these things, and our media system now, you want to talk about success, right? Our media system has just had so much success because a lot of the implicit biases and thoughts that we have really been programmed into us through our media, right? And the things that we get and how we view and see people, right? And how do we you know, so I where I was going was these words that have become bad words in our country, right? We think about socialism, you know, as one. It's like, you know, you bring up socialism and people are like, oh my God, no, that's the death of our country, right? And it's like, well, you know, but what is it to live in a space where our government, and more importantly, each citizen cares about other citizens just as much as they care about themselves?
Well, and you know, I would have as a capitalist and a person who has benefited from the capitalist society, I have definitely seen the egregious nature of greed in capitalism. And at the same time, I guess I would call myself more like I'm a I believe in compassionate capitalism. I believe that there doesn't need to be an underclass. I think that the safety net and such that, you know, Marx and that the socialists and early unionists, having been a union member in many different unions, and that's a whole nother discussion because some are good and some are terrible, is that this idea of how we care for the least fortunate in a society is the benchmark of the society. But because of the media and because of this whole bootstrap bullshit and all this other crazy stuff about more is better, greed is good, you know, capitalism's gotten a terrible name, you know, but there is a function, a purpose for people to be able to express their desire, their passion, their vision, and to bring it alive in a way that compensates them, but not at the expense of others. And that's I think one of the total mistruths about capitalism is this idea of the zero-sum game, that if I win, then you have to lose. I don't believe that for a second. And, you know, we can talk about that. That's a whole topic in itself, because we create money out of thin air. You know, there is no limited source of cash, of money. Elon Musk just created almost, how many $1 billion out of thin air that didn't exist. Bitcoin, thin air, these things. So the only question is, do people have equal access to those resources to be able to express their passion, to be able to create their vision, and do it in a way that's compassionate. Because otherwise, I mean, when I talk to white people, they're all like, well, Ben Carson's a successful Black man, and he thinks Black people are lazy.
Oh.
People say shit like that to me.
Right,
You know?
right.
What about
right.
Herman Cain? He became the head of the restaurant. And so unfortunately he passed away from COVID, but I mean, then they go on, they got some handful of litany of people that some right-wing media must be feeding them. I don't know. But
and that's when we talk about rugged individualism, right? Often what happens is white people are judged as their individual selves, and Black people and other people of color are judged as the group, right? So because Ben Carson is successful, or Herman Cain, or Oprah Winfrey, or Jay-Z, or any of these folks, because they did it, then of course all Black people, should be doing it. And if they're not, then they're lazy, right? And
what I'd like to see, though, this would be wonderful to see Jay-Z or any of these wonderfully successful individuals mentor the youth of color, to bring them up. Because if you take a look at corporate America, it is the white male who stands in leadership. So where are people of color in leadership? They never had the mentoring that they would maybe enjoy as white young students coming up the ranks. They're not supported by like-minded cultures or color or race. So if there's an opportunity to see these leaders today, or our Black leaders, our people of color, mentor and bring up youth and the young, and they're ready to go, and they're ready to have that capital instinct, it would be beautiful to see them support people of color.
And, I believe that a lot of them are, right? But this takes me to another debate that we often have in the Black community of what comes first. Does economics come first, or does culture come first? Right?
You can't have both?
Yeah, well, we have both.
Well, that's what I say. We need both, because ultimately, I mean, just having some more Black people with money and economically sufficient don't mean that they're going to do the things to uplift community.
Well, just look at white people with money. Come on. It's right. Not until they get really rich that they get guilty. But actually then they think, well, I have to go to this charity function to meet these other rich white people so I can get ahead. So now I have to pay some money and I have to buy some shit at the charity function. So people think I have a big heart and I care about people. Actually, I don't mean to be rude, because in truth, there are a lot of very, very compassionate people. But I do believe that there is the same kind of dichotomy, which is not very counter to the Buddhist philosophy, which is in order to become a full, complete person, you have to start by being a bodhisattva. But the white capitalist thing is, okay, well, now that I got a shitload of money and people are angry at me, I gotta start doling it out, but not too much. But
but there's a secondary benefit to doling it out too, right? And that means that if I give some money away, then I get a tax benefit. So then I may not have to pay the government as much in taxes, right? So there's a benefit there to that as well.
Yeah, and also let's, without getting in a long rant about rich people, there are all different kinds of rich people, because there are people who make their own money and are sincere. And by the way, I look at people like Andrew Yang, like that guy's a compassionate capitalist. Like the guy who founded Tom's Shoes, buy one, get one. Was that Tom's, right? Like giving away a pair of shoes. That's compassionate capitalism. But when I look at somebody like Bill Gates, it's like, okay, and I know everybody's down on Bill Gates right now, but I have a lot of appreciation for what Bill and Melinda have done in the sense of turning a corner of being a rich asshole to being probably the most altruistic people on the entire planet, having saved more lives. And so, yeah, has he done some fuck up shit? Yeah, absolutely. And is that stupid? Sure. But at least he turned the corner. and convinced a lot of other rich people like Warren Buffett to do good. But it's still what I don't call it this, but a friend of mine calls it, it's colonial altruism. It's like, I got a little too much in my corner. And so I feel like I may need to spread this around because I look around at the world and not everybody's living the way I do. So I say, hey, that's better than no altruism, right? Without question, people's lives are being saved. But it's not the same as coming up with the heart of altruism.
Yeah. Yeah. So you brought up that word colonials again, right? And it's like, what's the purpose and the motives? And absolutely, we have folks with good hearts, right? And they want to give back, and they're in the position of giving back. And, that's the right thing to do. I think that we have to, sometimes look at what is the purpose of all of that and what impact are we having on the world, right? So there's a lot of, we all have these computers, and I can't think of the exact material now, but a lot of the materials necessary to have computers come out of Africa, right? And then we consider Africa, and South America and some other countries third worlds, but we get raw materials from them to capitalize everything that we do so that we can make money, and we leave those countries underdeveloped so that we can always get what we need and do what we want. That's where again, when we think about colonialism, which I believe is also part of the root of racism.
Absolutely.
Right.
And May, you should jump in and talk about this.
No.
Hi.
And let me say, because we've talked about a couple of hot topics, right? And and the question for me becomes, how do we continue to have open dialogue about these topics without people going off or thinking that you hate America or you hate what it stands for, anything like that? I think that's part of the purpose of our conversations, is to talk about stuff. Let's talk about it. Right.
Kevin, I've known you for over 11 years. Mark, I've known you too, about the same. And what I love about our conversations is that I know from my heart how open you are to receive questions, even if they're stupid, even if they're insane, even if they're insensitive. You don't look at the other person and say, are you fucking nuts? No, you open dialogue. And Kevin, I think if I were to help everybody say, is it okay to ask a Black man questions about their Blackness? Would you invite them to ask any Black person? Probably not. But the point is to be sensitive, to be empathetic. And I think this is what we want to do, is on a neighborly basis, on our community basis. It's hard to sometimes think globally, but let's just think about our zip code alone. And that might be your workspace or your home. How do we open up communication, Kevin?
We have to be willing to open up our perspectives. I was having a conversation with someone this week, a white guy, and we seem to be stuck in our views sometimes in our world, right? And not realizing that, just as when we open up this conversation, talking about, what do you get up in the morning thinking about yourself? Do you get up in the morning, Mark, and say, hey, I'm a white guy in this world, right? And maybe you wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm a mixed Asian
mixed bag of rice,
right, person, right? And do I wake up saying, oh, I'm a Black man in America, right? Yeah, I do, right? And what was the question? Lord have mercy. I'm trying to get there, and I don't.
Well,
Oh, opening the conversation, right? Okay,
yeah.
I'm back now. I'm back now, right? So opening the conversation, and and talking with this white guy, it's like, the views, even after talking about that, one of their first examples was fear was instilled in them as a child of Black people. Right. And that they've gotten past that now and understanding, and they judge people as individuals. Right. Yet and still, it's hard to believe and to say that we live in a racialized society. And then one of the things used to justify that is, this is what really sometimes can get under my craw, is when people want to quote Dr. King. Right. Well, Dr. King said, if we can just be judged by the content of our character and all of that, that was a dream, a dream that has not come into reality as of yet. But people want to take it as a standard. No, and I really want to say that white people don't have the right to quote Dr. King in anything at all. Right? Because Dr. King lived a racialized existence in this country, and unless you live a racialized existence in this country, you don't have the context or the understanding of the quotes and the words that he used. Right? Now, you can ask questions to begin to understand, but then you have to also understand my experience. The only way to understand that is to talk and ask me questions. And you're right. I mean, you can't go and ask every Black person you see, hey, I got a question about being Black in America. Will you answer my question? Because some people just don't want to hear that. Right. That's my line of work. I'm open to it. That's part of why I'm here. That's part of my existence. But there are some, depending on your approach. Hey, Mark, it's, really great to be in your presence. And I have a couple of questions that, may be a bit challenging, but I'm wondering, if we can have a conversation about race, and you can tell me what it's like to be Black in America. I mean, to be white in America, right? I mean, of course, Mark, you wouldn't know what it's to be white, be Black in America. So to be white, right? To be white in America, right? And what I have to be willing to do is to accept if Mark says no.
Yeah.
And be good with it.
And, having had, as a person who has asked these questions a lot of my Black friends and colleagues, that's kind of how we got started with this whole thing with the three of us, is, just me understanding just what depth of experience and pain and disappointment and heartbreak there is, and how few white people ever ask Black people those questions.
Right.
And frankly, because the people I asked are people who are friends of mine or who I know, but yet we never had that conversation. And so, to ask people.
I would encourage that. I would encourage those kind of conversations, right?
But don't stay.
We should do that.
But to any white people watching this, don't say stupid shit like, "Can I touch your hair?" Or why are we still talking about slavery? Right. If you're gonna be asked questions, please be open. Ask open questions. Like,
I had a history teacher once when I was doing a professional development in a school. Why do we have to keep talking about enslavement? And I'm like, didn't you say earlier that you were a history teacher? Right. Why are we still talking about Greece and Rome and, the rise of Western civilization? Why are we talking about all of that if history isn't important?
Yeah.
Right. Now it's a topic that you feel uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And you may experience some guilt or shame around, right? Which is a whole nother conversation, because, how do we begin to get around that, you know.
Yeah, and we definitely should talk about white fragility, but maybe not today, but at some point. But I mean, I agree with you. I mean, our history is how we have arrived at where we are today.
Right.
And if we don't like where we are today, then we have to change it. But we can't change it by ignoring what has happened in the past.
Right.
Otherwise, we are going to relive it, as the wise person once said. We
Absolutely. And thinking about history, we have to pay homage because we are in the week in which our brother George Floyd was murdered, a year ago. So wanting to pay homage to him, and the deep sorrow that comes with his death. And even in that, we continue to experience on a weekly basis, just hearing about other Black men and Black women who are killed by the police.
Yeah. Kevin, will you close our session today with a saging? And that Absolutely. We can honor those who have struggled through hundreds of years, not just yesterday, not just a year ago, but hundreds of years ago. And we Absolutely. Thank everyone for joining us today. And we thank everyone for their comments. If you've got a topic that you want to bring up and you want to talk about, we love being uncomfortable. So bring it forward. Kevin, thank you very much. Marc, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take us out, Kev.
And with that, I'm going to pay homage to our ancestors, and I'm going to burn some sage. And first, I'm wanting to honor the ancestors, the indigenous ancestors of this land that we're on, recognizing that wherever we are in the Americas, that we are on indigenous lands, and honoring their ancestors and recognizing their descendants who continue to suffer from oppression, and honoring the kidnapped Africans who died on the continent of Africa resisting slavers, and those that made it through the Middle Passage or made it to the Middle Passage, that those who died in that journey, giving honor to them, and giving honor to those who made it to the Americas, from South America to North America and Central America, and how they endured and how they lived, loved, and laughed, that their descendants who continue to suffer from oppression in these countries in different forms be and exist, and how they all lived and loved and laughed. And giving honor to our brother George Floyd, who is bringing about another journey in America, where some have been awakened to the notion and the idea that we do live in a racialized society, and we do need to bring about change. And those who are open to the conversation, giving honor to our brother and to his family who lives and struggles, and all those who were traumatized and touched by his death, giving honor to them, and giving honor to our ancestors, and asking them to guide us on our journey of creating brave space so that we can get to peace bridges in our work, and bringing people together in critical and crucial and hard conversations, and honoring and remembering that even though we will laugh and we will enjoy this work that we do to help bring people together, that we recognize the seriousness of it, and ask our ancestors to guide us to help create this change and to guide our thoughts and our words and our actions. With that, I say Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And cut.